Hi, I'm Tim Belcher and welcome back to the channel. I need to build some cabinets for my shop, and as usual, I think I went a bit overboard. Check out this little guy. It is sort of a traditional lower cabinet with drawers you might find in a bath or closet, but this little guy has some superpowers. It can transform into any size and configuration. Look, here it is as a standard chest of drawers for a bedroom, a nice normal 4-drawer dresser. Here it is hiding out under each end of a desk with a file drawer and 2 others to collect all the junk that winds up on desks. Here are 3 of them working together to make a miter saw station, and what's cool here is that they are the exact size you need for your miter saw to fit perfectly in the middle. And look at this big one acting like a mobile outfeed table for the table saw, or if you wanted a crazy combination outfeed table / assembly table like I want, you could change the top out for something crazy looking like this thing. And of course, for the shop, bath, closet, or maybe someday kitchen, a bunch of them can hang around together under some nice stone countertop. All those are the same model, the same fully parametric model in Fusion 360. So you can choose the height, the width, the depth, the number of top and bottom drawers, and the model updates. It is parametric down to the pre-drilling of the mounting holes for the drawer slides based on whatever drawer slide you have. This model was designed from the ground up for a CNC. However, I think it could also produce really useful cut lists for non-CNC builds as well. Now I'm going to share these files for free, and I'll tell you about where to get them later in the video or in the description down below. I've actually already made versions of uppers, versions with doors and shelves. But more than just share the files, I want to see if I can build a little community around this project. One that may submit different door designs, different hardware options, different cabinet layouts. Who knows where this could go? And in the past, I've asked you to like, comment, and subscribe, and certainly do that if you like this video. Today, I want to ask you for something different. I want to ask you to share this file. If you know anyone with a CNC or a woodworker thinking about getting a CNC, this file, and who knows what files to follow, could save them a lot of time and money. And with the cost of cabinets skyrocketing, one closet design, one big garage renovation, maybe in the future a bath or a kitchen, could easily justify the cost of a CNC. So I'm going to build my first prototype of this model today and walk you through the model. This is how I made it. I'm going to throw a 3/4 inch piece of birch cabinet grade plywood on the CNC and get my first cuts going as I explain this model. This was an idea I had over a year ago to better organize my shop, and back then I searched for some models of traditional cabinet drawers, specifically in my case for the CNC, and while I found some, I really could not find this, a parametric model for what I thought was the most common form of a lower cabinet. And that surprised me because to me this was sort of the unwritten promise of a CNC, to print your own furniture. There's the Open Desk project where you can select your style of mostly flat pack type desks and some other types of furniture, but nothing for cabinets. It also doesn't help that these standard CNC style joints are really ugly and they don't really lend themselves to cabinetry. But I know enough about CNC to know that those types of joints aren't necessary. So you'll find no dog bones, no through joints, no box joints in this model. This model uses the CNC to lay out more traditional dado and tenon joinery in most cases. And I know there's commercial cabinet design packages, and if you ever ordered custom cabinets, a lot of those businesses actually use software to design their cabinets and have them made in large part by CNC in a factory elsewhere. But I could not find that sort of free or DIY version. But we've got Fusion 360, which is parametric and free, so I decided to try and make my own model and learn Fusion at the same time. I've gone through several iterations and I'm finally ready to share my model. And for the record, this is really my first project in Fusion, and I'm likely to have made a ton of mistakes, so Fusion people, take it easy on me, please. It's also the first time I've ever built a traditional cabinet, so cabinet guys, also take it easy on me. You may have noticed that my CNC laptop is sitting on a piece of scrap wingay, perched on one corner of the CNC, And so for this prototype, I'm going to create a small cabinet that is 18 inches deep, 20 inches wide, and the height of my CNC table, which is about 32 inches off the floor. I'll then select 2 bottom drawers, which can hold my clamps and larger items for the CNC, and 4 top drawers, which can hold my bits, my hold down solutions, my wrenches, and other smaller items. I can select those parameters in Fusion and everything will recalculate. I keep saying that word parametric, and briefly, for those of you who don't know or may be unfamiliar, that's what this means. This model is driven by parameters. There's no actual measurements in the CAD design. Everything instead references parameters, and everything is built mathematically from those parameters. Take height, for instance. Simple 32 inches. However, that is the height overall. When I go to set the height of a side panel, for instance, the height is actually calculated for that panel as height minus the caster height. The caster height can be used if you want to add casters or feet to the project. When I go to one of the extrude commands for that panel, you can also see that the top is cut down the depth of the top height, also a parameter. So everything in the design changes to make the height stay 32 inches. If I add a 3-inch top, the cabinet and all the drawers adjust slightly so that the height remains the same. This model currently makes the cabinet using 2 thicknesses of wood, and these are parameters called ply thick and ply thin. I realize I need to add separate definitions for the drawers to allow different thickness options there. In fact, as I built the prototype, I realized I needed to make quite a few changes to the model, and I'll cover many of them toward the end of this video. The 3/4 inch ply is used to make the left and right sides of the cabinet, the lower and upper kick panels, the top rail, and in this case I'll also use it to cut the top. The rest of the cabinet will be made out of 1/2-inch plywood, the base, all the drawer parts, including the drawer bottoms, and also in this case the drawer fronts. However, you can select a different thickness of drawer front. Just realize the rest of the cabinet will adjust to make sure the depth of the cabinet will be correct. Checking back on my build, I did my first pass with this 1/4 inch spiral downcut bit from Amana Tools that has an augering into it. You may have noticed that I set this sheet on top of a sacrifice 1/4 inch sheet of birch ply before securing them both to the table, and that was so I could get a cleaner cut from the underside with that downcut bit. I'll link to all the tools I use in this video in the description down below, but this bit cut very clean. Now I'm going to switch to a 1/16 inch end mill just to drill some pilot holes. For the sides in the model, I patterned the drawer slide holes up the side. Those drawer slide holes are actually parameters as well, and you can basically set the distance for the 3 screw holes on the cabinet side and on the drawer side themselves. The idea here is that you don't have to measure anything during assembly. If everything fits together as it should, you should be able to just attach the drawer slide components using these pilot holes, and everything should line up perfectly. And spoiler, this actually worked. However, using a 1/16 as a pilot hole was a little silly since they immediately disappeared with paint. I ended up using a screw and a punch tool to make those pilot holes larger when I assembled the prototype. In the future, I'll set those holes to be 1/8 of an inch, and that will simplify my tool paths as well. And of course, every screw hole diameter is also a parameter, so you can customize those as well. Okay, let's add a sheet of 1/2-inch ply and set up for the next CNC run. This sheet's going to get me the back, the base, the 2 bottom drawers, and a couple of parts for 1 top drawer. Let's talk briefly about the tenons and dados. And this can get confusing pretty quickly. In most cases, the tenon is set to be half the thickness of the material. In this instance, tenons on 1/2-inch material is 1/4 inch. On 3/4 inch material, it would be 3/8 of an inch thick. The length of each tenon is half the depth of the mating piece. So for instance, the back slides into the left side here. The back is 1/2 inch and the side is 3/4. So the length of that tenon is set to half the depth of the side minus a tolerance, and that tolerance is of course also a parameter. The width of the dado on the left side that will receive that tenon would be half the thickness of the back, with that same tolerance added to both sides, making the dado just a little wider than the tenon. The depth of the dado is simply half the depth of the part it's on. So on the left side it's 3/4 of an inch, that depth would be 3/8 of an inch. And during the build, I also realized I may need more than one tolerance to get better results, but this did work fine. Now, when you're CNCing a part such as this tenon, you will not get right angles as shown in the model. There'll be a slight curve in that corner that is the radius of the cutting bit, and that would prevent the tenon from sitting fully into the dado. So I first added a parameter to the model for the actual CNC bit size you are using, and in my case that's a 1/4 inch bit. And then I added a dado extension parameter that is half the diameter of the bit, and that makes the dado a little longer on each side so that the tenon fully seats. I also added a round to the end of each dado. This is not really functional, but I thought it looked better. So that's the basics of how a lot of pieces in this model mate together. The drawers do it a little differently. The base of the drawer has tenons on all 4 sides that fit into dados on each of the drawer sides. I wanted this entire project to be a one-sided job. With 2-sided jobs, we could do much more complicated joinery, but with the dados in place, the joints for the sides need to be done from the inside faces. Here, I use this sort of half-lap butt joint idea for the sides, and this worked in the prototype, but I think I'm going to make some changes to this joint. If you do not perfectly get the Z depth on these cuts to half the thickness of the material, you will have a gap in one of the mating faces, and that is very difficult with plywood. Over the course of my prototype, I walked around and measured the depth of my dados and the depth of my tenons. They were simply all over the place, from a few thou off to 10, 20, even 50 in some cases. Now I know the frame of my CNC is as square and flat as I can get it. I know my spoil board is flat and I am in tram, but the plywood thickness varies a lot over the board, more than I thought it would. Here's another example of that one-sided job limit. On my drawers, I want to drill pilot holes for the drawer slides, but I have to do that from the inside of the drawers and go all the way through. So for perfectionists, that means I have 3 tiny pilot holes visible on the inside of my drawers. That's a trade-off for one-sided milling, but they don't bother me and it's nothing a little putty can't hide. We will also create the countersink and holes for the drawer pulls and the drawer front attachment holes. The drawer front will receive simple through holes for the drawer pulls themselves. And you can see I have a single hole in the middle for a single drawer pull and a set of offset holes for a 2-point drawer pull. Of course, the spacing and size is driven by parameters, and you can suppress either of these options in the timeline. Off camera, I threw on a second sheet of 1/2-inch ply to get cutting on the top drawers. Now I made one mistake with the first 3/4 inch panel on the prototype that caused quite a bit of work to clean up. I measured my ply with calipers and reasonably consistently got about 0.71 inches on the side. I set that as the thickness of my ply, and that was simply too thin. This made my dados too shallow and my tenons too thick. You need to make sure to get at least half the depth of the ply and probably err slightly on too deep. This mistake led to a lot of tear out on the underside of the piece where I simply didn't get all the way through that last veneer, and a lot of cleanup on the sander. I used my belt sander for quick cleanup and a detail and mouse sander for the corners. All in, this only added an hour or 2 to the process, but I did need to use a chisel to thin out the tenons, and I did need to sand many of them shorter to get a good fit. So at this point I had enough parts for a dry fit, so I can fit the base and the back into one side and it will stand by itself, and then I can add the second side, and then add the lower and upper kick. And I realize the lower kick panel is usually part of a trim package for cabinets, but there's actually nothing stopping you from changing the depth of this piece to allow for that, or suppressing the dados on the side panels and leaving this part off. And finally the top rail, and we have a cabinet frame. I just wanted to test fit the top to make sure everything was square, and it was. I'll do a dry fit for the drawers as well to make sure they fit together nicely, and test the strap clamps I'm going to use. And it does fit together well, however you can see that very small gap in the corners. I'm sure the glue there will still grab and they'll be plenty strong. Onto the glue up, which was fairly easy after the dry fit. I did not use any screws in this prototype, just glue and brad nails. You may want to, but as you'll see later, I moved this cabinet around quite a bit and it was solid with just glue and nails. I went on to gluing up the drawers, and I will say that strap clamps come in very handy during this process. I think I bought 8 for this project, and I think I'll go back and purchase another 6 or so. For the deeper drawers, it really helps clamping on the bottom and the top. As soon as I got to a point I could test fit one of the drawers, I couldn't resist doing so. This was the point that I had in my head where, if my model was right, that I could mount the drawers without measuring. And it worked. I have to say that up until this point, I didn't really care much about this build. I kept telling myself that this was just a prototype, and the mistakes didn't matter much. And then that drawer fit so perfectly that I sort of became attached. I was suddenly holding wood putty and didn't know why. I started sanding everything, the carcasses, the drawers, breaking the edges. Paint and primer appeared and I started painting, a good primer coat followed by one coat of tinted Behr paint. I refused to do a second coat. This was, after all, a piece of shop furniture. Now, as I planned to use this design first for my shop, I set the kick height to 2.5 inches, knowing I wanted to put adjustable leveling feet on my cabinets. I'll attach those here under the kick and on the back. And I also want my cabinets mobile, so I'll attach a removable locking foot clamp near all 4 corners. I'll show you this in action later. And then it was time for final assembly and installing a whole bunch of drawer slides. In my original design, I actually made pilot holes in the back side of the drawer front for the mounting holes. The thought was that if it were perfect, that this would make all the gaps even right out of the box, and that may be true. I ignored them in this build as they filled with paint. I instead used the drawer pulls to tighten the drawer front on, and that let me manually adjust the gaps a little bit, and then a couple of spring clamps to hold it, and I could drive some screws home. And just how tired do you have to be in the shop to do this?
What the
It was time to move it to the floor and finish it up. The model has 2 ways to attach a top. This one uses tenons from the front top rail and back, and I'll just glue this top in place. You could suppress those tenons in the timeline and instead cut some corner brackets that might better allow for different materials or wood movement. And these would just be glued and nailed in place by hand. Well, here it is in all its glory. I think I really should have put a second coat of paint on it. Anyway, let me show you the mobility solution. You simply slide these wheels into the locking clamps on all 4 corners, and then lift and lock the cabinet up on wheels. And this to me gives me the best of both worlds in the shop. You buy this as a kit of clamps and wheels, and then you can just buy additional clamps for additional cabinets. I'll leave a link in the description down below, along with everything I used in this project. The slides, the handles, bits, and tools. However, remember, everything used is adjustable by parameter for whatever you need or have on hand. Thanks for watching and sticking with me this far, and remember, if you know someone with a CNC or a woodworker thinking about getting one, please share this video. As soon as I get some time, I plan on creating a version without any of the tenons and dados, so it could also be useful for a traditional woodworker for layouts and cut lists. So let me tell you how to get these files. I told you I wanted to build a small community around this, and to be honest, I don't know how to share CAD designs for mass collaboration. It's easy to share a file, not so easy to share a file and track revisions and things like that. So for now, I've just created a Facebook group called OpenCabinets. Head on over to Facebook, search for OpenCabinets and join the group. The Facebook group should allow us to post comments, post revisions. It's a good starting point. I don't know that that will be the forever home for this project. Now, let me quickly tell you about a couple of changes I've made to the file since I made this video. I've inset the back panel half the thickness of the back panel, and instead of using half the thickness for tenons on the back panel, I've used the full depth. That freed up the inside face for additional CNC operations. I can add a dado at the bottom to accept the base, make the base much stronger, but more importantly, it allowed me to develop this, a double wide cabinet with an adjustable divider in the middle. That divider can move left or right. You now have 4 quadrants of drawers to adjust, and I've even started to model in parametric doors, and I'll probably use those full extension European hinges on those. But that model is not quite ready for release. It still has quite a few bugs I need to track down in it. And let me also say that obviously we're dealing with a frameless cabinet. We certainly need to go design a cabinet with a face frame, and use undermount drawer slides and things like that if we want to ever move this into bath or kitchen territory. And that's sort of the reason why I want a community around this. It would be very easy to go design shaker style doors out of MDF, or even complex contoured design doors, trim panels, corner cabinets, etc. But I want to sort of nail down this base model first. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments down below, or better yet, join the group, comment there. Again, thanks for watching.